Going concern, business as unusual. The business sector's going concern assessment is generally a rather routine practice, but in extraordinary times, no process is as simple as it once was. By Ram Subramanian, CPA Australia's policy advisor, reporting. This article in 1, 2, 3. 1. A going concern assessment is an essential part of preparing financial statements that comply with AAS. 2. This assessment can prove challenging even in normal circumstances, but is significantly more difficult amid the current economic crisis. 3. It makes business sense to give serious consideration to where a business is likely to be in 6 to 12 months. This will also provide reassurance to auditors, management, and investors. Looking at least 12 months ahead to assess and establish whether an entity remains a going concern is a routine exercise conducted as part of preparing annual financial statements. Any entity that prepares financial statements in compliance with International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, or Australian Accounting Standards, AAS, is required to undertake this assessment to ensure the financial statements are prepared on a going concern basis. The forward-looking assessment, which can pose challenges even during normal times, is likely to be significantly more difficult in many industry sectors due to the economic uncertainties arising from COVID-19. The going concern assessment is primarily the responsibility of the preparers of financial statements, although the assessment and conclusions must also stand up to scrutiny by auditors. For a historically profitable entity with sufficient liquidity and ready access to finance if needed, the going concern assessment will require minimal effort during normal circumstances. This may continue to be the case for some businesses that meet the criteria and are unaffected by the current crisis, such as utility providers, technology infrastructure, and telecommunications, and others that are seeing an upturn in business activity, such as pharmaceuticals, healthcare providers, grocery retailers, and online retailers. Of course, past profitability and liquidity should be considered along with future prospects. A short-term revenue rise does not necessarily indicate sustained profitability. Even the most stable and successful organizations may need cash flow projections and forecast operating results based on reasonable assumptions to support the going concern assessment. It makes good business sense to look ahead and put some thought into where a business is likely to be in 6 to 12 months. This forward-looking assessment will not only provide comfort to auditors, but also to an entity's management and investors. Sean Steenkamp, CPA, Finance Partner, Enterprise Property and Strategic Sourcing at National Australia Bank, NAB, says, quote, "Preparers will need to carefully assess all previous going concern assumptions in light of the current environment," end quote. A stable and successful business operation could be the exception rather than the norm during these difficult economic times. All around us, we are seeing indicators of severe disruptions in economic activity that could have an impact on the going concern assessment. Many sectors have had to completely shut down their operations, either due to government-enforced requirements or due to a lack of customers. This includes airlines, tourism, hospitality, entertainment, and many retail operations such as clothing. Closure of manufacturing facilities and a reduction in commercial transport have resulted in severe interruption to supply chains as well. Some thought needs to go into how the concept of economic hibernation will affect the going concern assessment. Many of the Australian government's stimulus packages are aimed at providing financial support to businesses that have either closed down completely or reduced their operations significantly. This financial support is expected to tide them over until the economy is restarted. In addition to financial support from the government, some businesses may need support from their finance providers as well. Some listed entities are reaching out to investors through equity raising offers. Others, including non-listed entities, are approaching their debt providers to either restructure existing debt arrangements or to establish new lending arrangements. Yet others are turning to governments for rescue packages to keep them afloat through the crisis. Quote, "Access to funding sources such as shareholder funds or credit might not be readily available when a significant portion of the economy is seeking the same access," Steenkamp says. Steps being taken to shore up business balance sheets will factor into going concern assessment. Although there are some uncertainties around when normal economic activity will restart, estimates will need to be made around when this will happen to feed into cash flow projections and financial forecasts based on operating activities and results. These estimates will have to be based on reasonable assumptions. Any uncertainties associated with these and other assumptions made in determining that the going concern basis is appropriate will need to be fully disclosed in the financial statements. Steenkamp says, quote, "Financial institutions have announced various initiatives to assist where they can, but for assessing the going concern assumption over at least 12 months, it will be important for preparers to consider their long-term ability to repay debt in a subdued economic environment." End quote. Going concern assessments based on overly optimistic and unreasonable assumptions are unlikely to pass the audit test. Investors and financiers may not take kindly to misleading or inappropriate going concern assessments by entities. It is unusual for financial statements to be prepared on a non-going concern basis, but we live in unusual times. According to Siva Sivanantham, Director, National Financial Reporting Advisory at Grant Thornton, Australia, quote, "An entity should only move to a basis of accounting other than the going concern basis if the entity has made a decision to shut down or has no realistic alternative but to do so." For example, if an entity goes into administration and sells its business because there is no realistic alternative and will then be winding up, a non-going concern basis would be appropriate. Accounting standards are written from a going concern perspective and do not prescribe or define any alternative basis of accounting, such as liquidation basis, where the going concern basis is no longer appropriate, Sivanantham says. General industry practice is to follow the recognition and measurement requirements in accounting standards as closely as possible, even when the going concern basis is no longer appropriate, he adds. End quote. In addition to the going concern assessment, directors are also required to make a declaration of solvency under the Corporations Act that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the entity will be able to pay its debts as and when they become due and payable. Regulatory Guide 22 Director's Statement as to Solvency, RG22, issued by the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, envisages a qualified statement if there are material uncertainties surrounding a company's solvency, or a negative statement if it is clear that the company is insolvent and will be unable to pay its debts as and when they fall due. Included within the economic measures announced by the government in response to the COVID-19 crisis is a 6-month temporary safe harbour for directors to protect them for personal liability if they continue to trade while insolvent. The interplay between the going concern assessment and the impact of uncertainties on the directors' statements as to solvency and when they need to qualify that statement needs consideration, particularly in the context of the recent provision of insolvent trading relief to directors. The Australian Accounting Standards Board, AASB, is developing guidance on applying the going concern concept against the COVID-19 backdrop. It is also considering guidance on the accounting principles that could be followed when the going concern basis does not apply. Sean Steenkamp, CPA, and Siva Sivanantham are members of the CPA Australia External Reporting Centre of Excellence.